It's my journey, it's your journey. You need my help and I need yours. 'Cause we are
10 inspiring lessons from the life of Saint Rose of Lima. There's a certain wonder in the stories of the saints, a sense that their lives, while woven from the same threads as our daily existence, shimmer with a radiant love for Christ that feels at once unreachable and intimately familiar. Saint Rose of Lima is one such soul whose faith blazed so brightly that it lit up not only her beloved Peru, but the hearts of Catholics throughout history, at Journeys of Faith, where our mission is to help souls discover Jesus and Mary through the lives of the saints. We believe that Saint Rose's extraordinary journey carries lessons for every generation of believers. Born Isabel Flores de Oliva in 1586, Saint Rose of Lima's life was defined by an unshakable devotion to God, fierce humility, and an apostolic zeal that turned her ordinary days into a testimony of heaven's presence on earth. As the first canonized saint of the Americas, she stands as both a light for her people and a beacon for all who long to draw closer to Jesus and his mother Mary. Her story, rich in sacrifice, mystical encounters, and everyday acts of love, offers modern Catholics not only a glimpse of holiness, but also practical wisdom for navigating life's joys and sorrows with faith. In this article, we'll journey through the inspiring lessons taught by Saint Rose of Lima's life, unpacking her virtues in a way that speaks to our hearts today. Whether you're looking for encouragement to deepen your prayer life, strengthen your commitment to serving others, or simply find hope in the silent trials you bear, let these lessons open a new chapter in your own journey of faith. Who was Saint Rose of Lima? Born in 1586 in Lima, Peru, Saint Rose of Lima is celebrated as the first canonized saint of the Americas, and a radiant example of holiness from the New World. Named Isabel Flores de Oliva at birth, she was affectionately nicknamed Rose by her family after a mystical vision revealed her extraordinary spiritual beauty, a fitting name for a soul whose faith would inspire generations. As a child, Rose displayed unusual piety and devotion. At a young age, she chose to dedicate her life entirely to God, following the example of Saint Catherine of Siena. Though her family dreamed of a comfortable marriage for her, Rose had a different calling. She embraced a life of prayer, austerity, and service, crafting a humble hermitage in her parents' garden, where she would spend hours in contemplation, penance, and loving conversations with Jesus and Mary. Amidst the bustling colonial society of Lima, Saint Rose stood out for her charity to the poor and the sick. She used her needlework and small garden to support her family while quietly tending to those in need. Her love for Christ was so deep that she practiced remarkable acts of mortification, not out of self-punishment, but as a loving surrender to God's will. Her spirit did not go unnoticed. Even in her lifetime, people sought her prayers and wisdom. Despite many trials, misunderstandings, physical suffering, and spiritual darkness, she remained steadfast, drawing inner strength from the Eucharist and her devotion to Our Lady. Saint Rose of Lima's life reminds us that true holiness flourishes not in grand gestures, but in everyday fidelity, sacrifice, and service, rooted in unwavering love for God and neighbor. Find holiness in ordinary life. Saint Rose of Lima's life speaks to the incredible potential of everyday faithfulness. Unlike those who traveled far and wide or performed public miracles, Rose discovered sanctity right in the heart of her Peruvian hometown. Amidst family duties, simple work, and humble surroundings, her days were filled with the ordinary tasks of gardening, needlework, and assisting the poor of Lima. Yet she transformed these simple acts by offering each one to God with love and devotion. What made her unique was not grand gestures, but her willingness to find holiness in the hidden corners of daily life. She saw no moment as too small to offer to Christ. Rose's bedroom became her convent, her garden, her place of prayer, her needle and thread, instruments of charity for the needy. In every ordinary action, She recognized the presence of God and the chance to serve Him. For anyone seeking inspiration, Saint Rose reminds us that the path to sainthood is often paved with quiet sacrifices and unnoticed service. Holiness isn't reserved for monks or missionaries alone. It's accessible in our kitchens, classrooms, workshops, and offices. If we approach each moment with love and intention, offering our joys, burdens, and routines to the Lord, we too follow the path the saints have walked. Through the lens of faith, even the most mundane day becomes filled with grace and purpose. Make prayer the heart of each day. For Saint Rose of Lima, prayer wasn't just a habit, it was the living rhythm that beat at the center of her entire life. From a young age, Rose felt irresistibly drawn into intimate conversations with God, whether in the quiet of her small garden or amid bustling family duties. She showed us that prayer can happen anywhere, while tending flowers, caring for the sick, or sitting silently with the Lord in the still of the night. In an age busy with distractions, Saint Rose's example shines all the brighter. Despite her many responsibilities and the noise of daily life, she carved out spaces for prayer, as if she were guarding a precious treasure. She treated each moment with God as an opportunity for deep communion, often spending long hours in reflection, adoration, and quiet listening. Her story calls us to ask, what might happen if prayer became the heartbeat of our own days? Through her unwavering devotion, Saint Rose of Lima teaches that prayer is not an escape from the world, but the light that infuses every action with purpose and peace. She reminds us that no matter how ordinary or hectic our tasks may be, weaving in moments of prayer, no matter how small, can transform them into offerings of love. In following her path, we discover that the heart's truest home is found whenever we pause to meet the Lord in prayer. Love Jesus through the poor. Saint Rose of Lima's life sparkles with the unmistakable light of charity, a love that sought and served Jesus hidden in the faces of the poor. Living in 17th century Lima, amid both colonial splendor and desperate poverty, Rose recognized Christ in the hungry, the sick, and the unwanted. Her family's backyard became a makeshift shelter for Lima's forgotten, where she tended to their wounds and soothed their loneliness with gentle words and food, despite the protests or misunderstandings from those around her. Saint Rose's example challenges us today. Do we dare to see Jesus standing in the doorway in rags, asking for water, dignity, or a kind smile? Rose understood that every act of mercy toward the suffering is an act of love offered directly to Christ Himself. She embodied the gospel's radical call to love the least of these, not as a distant ideal, but as a daily, demanding, and beautiful reality. Her sacrifices remind us that love of Christ is inseparable from love of neighbor, especially those who cannot repay us. In caring for the sick, feeding the hungry, and comforting the afflicted, Rose of Lima teaches us a simple catechism of the heart. That faith is not only kneeling in prayer, but rolling up one's sleeves for the sake of love. Inspired by her example, let us ask where Christ is waiting for us, in our neighborhoods, parishes, or even our own homes, hoping to be loved through the poor. Embrace sacrifice with prudence. Saint Rose of Lima's youthful zeal for holiness is etched into Catholic tradition. Yet it's the prudent way she balanced sacrifice that continues to teach us today. From her earliest years, Rose desired nothing more than to give herself completely to Christ. She heard the call to sacrifice, choosing voluntary fasting, simple clothing, and hidden acts of penance, but always with discernment. Her devotion was never reckless or boastful. Rose listened for God's quiet voice amid her burning love, learning that not every sacrifice is willed by God, and that prudence is a form of humility. She sought the wisdom of trusted confessors and spiritual guides, determining which penances would help her soul, and which were born of pride or the desire to be noticed. Rose's sacrifices weren't empty gestures. They became fuel for her compassion towards Lima's poor and suffering. Her fasting and night vigils freed her heart for greater service. Instead of withdrawing from the world, or resenting her burdens, she found ways to bring beauty and joy to her family. Growing a garden of flowers to support them, and using her own hands to care for the sick. In the story of Saint Rose of Lima, we see that true Christian sacrifice isn't about how much suffering we can endure, but about making space for God and others. Her example urges us to examine our own motives. Do we offer up our inconveniences and sacrifices out of love, or out of restlessness, pride, or guilt? Rose gently calls us to prayer and prudence, reminding us that every act of self-denial, when done with humility, becomes a channel for divine grace. Remain faithful through family opposition. The story of Saint Rose of Lima is strikingly alive with the tension between holy ambition and the voices closest to her heart. From a young age, Rose felt the gentle nudges of God, calling her to a life of prayer, sacrifice, and radical charity. But these gentle nudges soon became a roaring flame, one that made even her own family uneasy. Imagine Rose, determined to consecrate her entire being to Christ, yet surrounded by loved ones who wanted her to follow a more reasonable path. Her parents, struggling to provide for their large family, hoped their beautiful daughter might marry and bring stability. Yet, Rose's soul burned for something higher, something eternal. Her resolve to remain a virgin and devote herself to Jesus bewildered, and, at times, angered her family. Her mother especially could not accept this refusal of the world's expectations. Still, Rose met this trial not with resentment, but with deeper prayer and steadfast patience. She transformed everyday duties, serving her parents, tending the garden, sewing to help family finances, into acts of hidden worship. When her resolve was tested, she bent but did not break, pressing closer to Christ and his Blessed Mother for strength. Saint Rose's story invites us into her struggle. Fidelity is not always greeted with applause, even from those who love us most. But her example radiates a quiet courage, an encouragement for anyone navigating family misunderstandings or opposition to a life of deeper faith. Rose teaches us that it is possible to honor our family and stay anchored in God's call, trusting that acts of love, patience, and perseverance will bear fruit, even if those seeds are sown in tears. Let her example be a witness. When family life becomes difficult because of your devotion, you are in good and holy company. Trust that God sees your hidden sacrifices. Like Rose, you can turn family trials into a humble altar, remaining firmly rooted in your yes to Him. Guard purity of heart. Saint Rose of Lima's life shines as a gentle but blazing reminder that holiness is rooted in the purity of one's heart. From an early age, Rose was captivated by the love of Christ, resolving to offer her whole self to Him alone. In a world that sometimes equates worth with outward glamour and fleeting achievements, Rose's unwavering commitment to inward beauty stands as a beacon for all who seek to walk the narrow way. Rose chose to protect her heart from distractions that could detour her from God's call. She clothed herself simply, rejecting vanity and status for a hidden life of prayer and sacrifice. Even as she was praised for her stunning appearance, she strove to direct attention away from herself and toward Christ. This was not born of self-negation, but of a knowing confidence. She understood her dignity came from being a beloved daughter of God. Through fasting, prayer, and acts of penance, Rose sought to keep her heart undivided, reserved for God. She reminds us that purity is not just about external actions, but about the movements of the soul. It's about loving Christ with such sincerity that His peace fills every corner of our hearts, transforming how we see, think, and act. Like Saint Rose of Lima, we are invited to re-examine the desires and distractions that compete for our attention. Her example calls us to ask, what am I letting into my heart? And does it draw me closer to Christ? In the sanctuaries of our homes and the noise of our workplaces, Rose's testimony encourages us to guard the treasure within, to nurture virtue, simplicity, and a love that burns for God alone. Turn suffering into an offering. Saint Rose of Lima understood suffering in ways both deep and profound. Her life was marked not by ease, but by persistent hardships, illness, misunderstanding, and at times even rejection from those closest to her. Yet, Rose never allowed suffering to lead her into despair. Instead, she transformed pain into prayer, teaching us that every moment of hardship is a chance to unite ourselves more closely with Christ's own passion. As a young girl, Rose would spend hours lost in prayer before a simple image of Our Lady. When her body was racked with illness, she would quietly offer her aches for the needs of others. For souls in purgatory, for the conversion of sinners, and for the sanctification of her family and community. She wore a crown of thorns hidden beneath a garland of roses, not out of pride or self-punishment, but out of love. Rose believed that by willingly accepting discomfort and presenting it to Jesus, she could help bring God's mercy and blessings upon the world. Her example invites us to a new way of seeing suffering, not as meaningless pain, but as an opportunity to make a spiritual offering. Whether we face physical weakness, emotional loneliness, or the daily frustrations of life, Saint Rose encourages us to bring these trials before God in humble trust. Each tear, each trial endured in faith, becomes a prayer, a silent hymn of love echoing in the heart of the Church. In this, suffering is not wasted. It is redeemed, transformed, and made fruitful for the good of many. Persevere through spiritual trials. The life of Saint Rose of Lima was not without suffering or conflict. Far from it. In the stillness of her family garden, Rose endured tremendous spiritual trials that would have unsettled the strongest of hearts. She faced isolation, misunderstanding, even ridicule from those closest to her. Despite these adversities, she pressed forward, rooted in prayer and her unbreakable devotion to Christ. Saint Rose teaches us that the path to holiness winds through valleys of difficulty and darkness. There were moments when God seemed distant, when Rose's sacrifices weighed heavy, and when temptation whispered that her efforts were in vain. But instead of surrendering to despair or distraction, she clung to the sacraments, spent hours before the Blessed Sacrament, and fortified herself with the Rosary. Her witness reminds us, trials are not a sign of God's absence, but an invitation to deeper faith. When the cross felt heaviest, Rose saw it as a privilege to imitate her beloved Jesus. She did not seek escape, but embraced her suffering as part of her mission. Every struggle was offered for the salvation of souls and the conversion of sinners. Let the perseverance of Saint Rose of Lima encourage you when you encounter spiritual dryness or difficulties in your own journey. Her story assures us that God draws closest in our seasons of trial and, through perseverance, shapes us into saints. Serve others from your own home. Saint Rose of Lima understood that charity isn't limited by the walls of one's dwelling. Growing up in colonial Peru, Rose's family home was modest, but her heart was vast. Her small actions of love left ripples across her city. For Rose, service was not always dramatic or visible to the world. Instead, she embraced a quiet apostolate, turning her own garden and room into shelters for the sick and poor whom society ignored. It didn't matter that she was not out in the bustling city square. Rose's door was always open to children, widows, and anyone in search of comfort. She would spin her own linen to make bandages, prepare soup from simple ingredients, and offer prayers and encouragement to all who crossed her threshold. In her home's courtyard, she planted herbs and flowers, using them for healing balms and medicines. Her mother often worried that this generosity would drain the family's resources, but Rose trusted in God's providence, believing that every home, no matter how humble, could become a sanctuary of love. Today, Saint Rose challenges us to see our own homes as places of ministry. Can we make a meal for a sick neighbor, open our dining table to someone who is lonely, or offer a sincere word of encouragement to a struggling family member? Through small daily acts of kindness, rooted in faith, we begin to transform our families and communities, just as Saint Rose did centuries ago. Her example proves that true charity often starts not in grand gestures, but in ordinary living rooms, kitchens, and backyards, where love and compassion quietly work their miracles.
It's your journey, but we won't make the trip alone, 'cause we know God will lead us home. It's our journey of faith. It's our journey of faith.